Good morning, everyone. Good morning. It's so good to see you. I see some faces visiting from far, far away. I used to live in Queens for quite some time, over 10 years, and Vic Regidor is visiting. It's really nice to see him there. We used to play ping pong all the time. And so, today is Super Bowl Sunday. And if you don't mind switching to my computer. And in one sense, I was quite surprised when I came to America. First of all, I didn't know that football was a different kind of sport. There's only one time where it's kicked. So I think I need to look up the origins of why it's called football. There must be something about it. But I remember in 2013, it was the first time I ever heard of Super Bowl. And I heard that over, 150 million or 200 million people in America watch this sport. It's the biggest thing in America. And many times I think about it, and it fascinates me how much people put everything on the line for sports. One of my friends told me that if the Seattle Seahawks wins, he doesn't know what he's going to do with himself. So, we'll see. Here it is. I just want to acknowledge Kenny and Heidi. So I think it's very noble to be able to just offer free tutoring for the children. For anyone in Las Vegas, when I came to Nevada, I was told that, it's working. I was told that Nevada ranks very low in education. Something about the 49th out of the 50 states, 48th. And so, please, it's a diamond in the rough year. Please contact them. They want to support as much as you can, I believe, for the next 2 months or so. And so please, sign up with them. And I really appreciate these initiatives. Yesterday, on Gloria, had this painting. It was where people could come and just paint, I believe, the Tree of Life. And so if you have any talents or anything you'd like to share, please let us know. And let's share with one another. It's a community we're building. And we all each have different passions, different interests that we can share and grow together in. And so I highly encourage that. Today I'd like to talk on the message of wandering in time. Wandering in time. In today's society, there is a thing about the wanderer. Perhaps 50 years ago, there was such a thing about just going someplace you don't know. Perhaps there is some fascination with getting on the road without a destination in mind. There are many who live their lives going to just traveling country after country. And there are many who say there is no purpose in life. There is the wanderer. And what is wandering, and how does it pertain to time? Throughout all of history, there's been a great fascination with time. Some describe it as the fourth dimension. But do we really know what time is? Can anyone here describe to me or to us what time is? It's a bit hard to define time. It's not a tangible thing. It's an existence, and Wikipedia describes it as this: the continuous progression of existence that occurs in apparently irreversible succession from the past, through the present, and into the future. So as we understand time to be, it's almost like a plane that keeps moving forward. And we're on that plane. No matter what, we are going to be moved with the ebbs and flow of time. Every person in this world, we know guaranteed will someday leave the physical world. We're all progressing through it, yet many times we don't stop and think about the essence of why we are progressing through this plane of time. An ancient philosopher once said, Heraclitus, he said that no man ever steps into the same river twice, because the river is not the same, and neither is the man. It's interesting. They say that when we look at someone, we're looking at the past, right? Because it takes time for light to travel. When you look up at the stars, you're looking at stars that existed millions and billions of years old. They may not even be alive today. So, time is interesting. I'm a different person right now than I was when I first started speaking. Yet, time is also what gives our lives meaning in some way, shape, or form. Long time ago, I watched a Korean drama called Goblin. Some of you may know of it. It was about this godly being who was cursed a long time ago to live forever. So he lived about 957 something years old. And because he lived that long, he was very wealthy. He had everything in this world. But there came a time when he longed to, the blessing for him was to die. It was so interesting. When you live through the vast expanse of time, he had done everything. He would live to cause miracles in some people's lives, and he would live for the purpose of love and all that you can think of. But however, there was nothing clear within his life. Not only that, but the people he loved. There's a scene where he's buried everyone he's loved, and he just sits there every year. And he's jealous of the people who went away, but he can't bear to keep losing his loved ones. So that becomes a blessing of sort. And so in many ways, time is a blessing upon each and every one of us. And because we have this constraint of time, we have to think about our purpose. Why are we here? Because to everyone, death catches up. And we all approach death in varying different ways, and some of us see death as something that's fearful or scary. In fact, for most of human history, many people have feared death. There were only a few people in history who didn't fear death because they understood the implications of it and where they would be going next. But death helps us to repurpose our lives, to think a little bit about what's next. Where are we going and what are we doing? And when it comes to the purpose of life, there's a famous cartoonist. He said that the market for something to believe in is infinite. It's so interesting. We're all looking for a cause to stand with, a song to sing, a flag to wave. Today, there are many people who are going to be very happy or very sad at the end of the day. Throughout history, we've always aligned ourselves, trying to find someone, something, some place to be, to find our identity, to stand up for something, because there is a longing for each and every one of us to find purpose. It could be at a large scale in terms of our existential purpose, but even on our day-to-day, or even something as menial as football. So, when it comes to the purpose of our life and the inevitability, the fact that death is inevitable, we have to think a little bit more. How do we live our lives, and where do we go? There is a famous doctor named Dr. Stella Manuel. She asked the question. She says, if only the living knew what the dead knew. She said, if only the living knew what was on the other side, even just 1 minute of what would confront us after we are alive, how would we live? How would we change? Life is, in many ways, a search for meaning, a search for purpose. Many of you may have read the book, Man's Search for Meaning. An incredible book. It's Viktor Frankl, who is in the camps. In Austria. And in that time, he witnesses many people come through, many people surviving, but also many people dying. And he said the difference between those who died and those who survived were those who had something to live for. Because in those camps, you had some coins, you had some money to buy rations of your food or whatnot. But he said you would notice when someone gave up on life, because they would use their last bit of money to buy a cigarette, for example, instead of food. And you could tell that they had lost hope. For him, his North Star was his wife, who was pregnant with their baby. And every night he would look up at the stars, hoping that he could one day see her, one day meet her. Every single person that survived in that camp had something to live for. That's an intrinsic part of our life. We're all aiming, we're all trying to find this purpose. And there's no shortage of literature and poetry explaining to us, trying to tell us what the purpose of life is. So much so that in today's world, some people say there is no meaning to life. But I doubt that. When we look at the Bible, in Genesis 1:28, he gives us a framework of what life could be, what life should be. It says, God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky and over every living creature that moves on the ground. When God tells man to be fruitful and increase in number, it wasn't just mankind that God gave this commandment to. When God made the fish in the sea, God said, be fruitful and multiply. But to humans, he said, to fill the earth and subdue it and rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky. So there's something precious about humankind. There's something precious about what we believe in. There's something precious about who we are in our existence. And 2 verses prior in Genesis 1:26, God talks about who we are, that we are created in the image of God. When we look at Romans 14:7-8, Paul says, for none of us live for ourselves alone, and none of us dies for ourselves alone. If we live for the Lord, and if we die for the Lord. So whether we live or die, we belong to the Lord. Sometimes I ask myself the question. Last night, till around 11 p.m., I had one young college student I was talking with. And he was very curious. He was curious about who is considered Christian and why some groups are considered Christian and not Christian. And so he asked, okay, let's look it up on AI. We had conversations about it, and what it comes down to is what we have come to understand and what we have decided is what Christianity is. That's what it generally comes down to. But the reason I bring that up is that sometimes we ask the question, if God is real and God is the only existence, where did all of matter come from? What did God create from? What did God create out of? Are we an extension of God? Or was there something else that coexisted with God? And the reality of asking that question is it's very hard to find that answer. It's hard to find that answer without seeking the wisdom of something beyond ourselves. But the reality is the answer is always within ourselves. So I don't have an answer to that question, but if we are to say that God is and was the only existence, that must mean that we are all in existence that are part of God. That nothing came to be that was not of and from God. Does that make sense? That our souls are inextricably connected to God. And so when we read this, it says, for none of us live for ourselves alone, and none of us dies for ourselves alone. If we live for the Lord. If we die for the Lord. So whether we live or die, we belong to the Lord. It brings a certain amount of peace to my heart, knowing that my existence is not just singular and independent in the vast expanse of time. That it belongs to something. That if I were to die, there is a reason to it, and there is a place that I will go as a person, and that I have a reason to live. It means that everything that's created has a purpose to live. Everything that was created was brought forth for a reason. So, throughout life, we talk about this point of what happens after death, because it defines a certain very important component of our lives, a milestone of sort. Many of us work our whole lives preparing for that moment, or preparing for that moment right before it. When, like I mentioned, Dr. Stella Emanuel said, if only the living knew what the dead knew, well, it's very interesting. We have seen and heard many stories about people who have shared testimonies about experiencing the life thereafter. Long time ago, when people would share these stories, some people and some psychologists would say it was a hallucination. That maybe they were just thinking of said thing. In recent years, it's happened so frequently that they made a documentary about it. Came out in 2023 called After Death. I encourage you to watch it if you have the time. It's about this point about what comes after death. If only the living knew what the dead knew. So I find it fascinating how within our lifetime there could be people who are alive who knew what the dead knew to a certain degree. And perhaps this is the revelation that we need as people. It's a revelation that God might be sending to us, so to awaken us to the reality of this world. 2 years ago, I met a boy, a college student named Ben Davis, and he shared with me that he wasn't sure if God existed. He wasn't sure if he believed in the afterlife. But 3 months ago, while at the gym, he had experienced a moment where he came out of himself and saw himself. And he just couldn't explain that. 2 months afterwards, the same thing happened to him. And he couldn't help but think that he was dying. So he entered into this state of reflection. He's a neuroscience major at UNLV, and so he's in that realm of what is knowledge? What is human creation? What is the limitation of our imagination? In this documentary, you hear stories of people who, right at their deathbed, they either died in an accident and were resuscitated. So death is when your heart stops beating. There were people who were intentionally killed in the operation room because an operation needed to happen. You hear these different stories, not just from the people who passed away, but also from the perspective of the doctors. And it's quite fascinating to hear the testimony of an atheistic cardiologist trying to understand and comprehend something that he or she has never seen before. One such, Ron Papalardo, goes around talking about there was a neuroscience many years ago, I believe about 14, 15 years ago, who wrote papers on the fact that, on the points of hallucination. And it was always attributed to the fact that our brain was active. As a result of it, there was an explanation for hallucination. However, he had a brain tumor, and his brain function had to be seized before the operation. And then he had a near-death experience, as they call it. He had an experience where he went to different parts of the spirit world. He met someone whom he didn't know, but found out later was his wife's sister in the other world. And now he goes around the world talking about this point. In this documentary, there was one cardiologist. He said, if the people who die claim to be able to see something, there has to be a way to prove it. And across the board, everyone, almost every testimony of someone who goes to the next life includes an aspect. The first part is always seeing themselves. They're always seeing, and then it's a moment of confusion and then realization that something is different. And it's always next, you go into some kind of hallway that doesn't end. And for some, someone will come for you. For some, you keep on walking in a valley of despair. Maybe you're falling, but it always starts somewhere around there. So this cardiologist said there has to be a way to prove it. And then he shared one testimony. He said, so there was this one time where this lady, she had a medical condition where she had to be legally killed in order for an operation to be done on her brain. So no brain function, no heart function. The lady dies about 6 hours after the operation. She comes back to life and she shares about all the things that happened, all the things that she saw. And then the cardiologist, and then she's asked the question. And she describes a moment when someone had dropped a medical tool on the floor and had to leave the room, and somebody else came back. She described it, and they look through the footage and they see exactly that happening right there. So to him, after seeking for evidence, it felt like an obvious thing. This was in some way a confirmation. This is not to say that he believes in the spirit world, but he believes that there was something interesting that happened there. So knowing that death will eventually come, many of us usually prepare for retirement, right? Our whole life, we're just saving and saving and saving, and maybe we don't know. I think many of us are hopeful we might live to 100. That if we retire at 60, 65, and I know I'm talking to a crowd where you're not even retired, maybe 70, 75, that maybe we'll be able to enjoy those last 15 years of our life. And many do it altruistically. But there are many in this world who sacrifice so much just for those 15, 20 years. I know of a guy I spoke to a month ago who was maxing out his HSA, which is a health savings account, was maxing out his Roth IRA, was putting the maximum match of his 401k, and he was telling me, I don't have enough. This gentleman was only 29 years old. It's so interesting. And the reality in life is, if you look statistically, the people who have more, the wealthiest people, are the ones who claim to not have enough. Why is that? There's a theory called lifestyle creep. That means if you're a little bit wealthier, you live in a wealthier neighborhood, you have wealthier friends, and your wealthier friends have a yacht or whatnot, and then you start comparing yourselves. When all of a sudden your children are in wealthier schools where you pay more money for the private education, and all of a sudden your baseline level of needs goes up. So it's an interesting thing. When you have more, you tend to yearn for more and focus on your lack. But in our lives, we focus a lot on retirement. We're trying to retire well. But how much of our lives do we focus on the eternal life? How much of our lives do we focus on everything that comes right after? I saw a speaker once have a really long string, a really long yarn. You couldn't see the end of it. And then he said, our lives are only but a thumb's width of that string. And we focus everything that we have on that 1 inch of strings in our life. And of course, it's simple to think so. And actually, I understand it. Because I spend a lot of time with our youth on Saturdays who are hanging out in the back, hopefully listening to me right now. And I get it. When you're younger, that's your world. That's your world. That's all you've ever known. That's all you've ever known. The fact that your mom always comes and washes your laundry for you, or that there's always food on the table, that's your world. Somehow it's magic. I always slept in the living room couch, and then I'd always wake up in the bed, so I found no reason to not sleep in the living room couch, because somehow I ended up in the bed always, right? It's just lifestyle. And these things have to be, you almost have to be trained to be able to come to open your eyes to see. My whole life, I never cared about washing my pillow cover. Until one day my wife told me, actually the interesting thing is, so we share the same bed, obviously, and we have the exact same pillow cover, white. You couldn't tell that they were the same, because one of them is noticeably more brown than the other. So clearly I sweat a lot in my sleep, I think, even though you could wash it all over again. But the case in point is, when we're younger, that's all we've ever known, right? All you've ever known is what you've been given. But life is a journey of coming to discover ourselves more, come to discover what this world is all about. And so one day, when in American societies, you have the parents ask the son or daughter to leave the house, for example, right? It's supposed to be an eye-opening moment. Go and make something of yourself. In Asian households, maybe you stay with your parents, and but you out of filial piety, you work to make sure that everything runs smoothly. But for humanity who doesn't know what eternal is, it makes sense that we focus so much on this existence. But when we think about it, Father says human beings live for 10 months in the womb, 100 years in this physical world, and for eternity in the spirit world. The earth is covered with air, but the spirit world is covered with love. Human beings inhale oxygen and exhale carbon dioxide on earth. But in the spirit world, they live inhaling love. The love they give and receive in the spirit world is true love. Many of us have seen, many of us have heard of this, but what does that mean? How many of you remember the time when you were in your mother's womb? No hands are up. It makes sense. But that was an important time in our lives. Many of us don't even remember when we were 1 year old. Some of us may remember when we were 2 or 3, but it's a faint memory. Many of us will remember obviously yesterday a whole lot more prominently than we remember 30 years ago. But interestingly, I heard a theory about children remembering if you ask a child before they're 5 years old, they will remember the time they're in their mother's womb. So ever since I heard that, I was in this community when I heard it. This was about 2.5 years ago. There are many children in our communities, right? So I went, hunting one by one. Some of the children, you just can't get them to speak rationally. They just want to play. But there was one child, his name is JC and I. He's very smart, very, very smart guy. And of course, when you calm him down, he'll talk. I asked him when he was 3 years old. I said, Jace, do you remember when you were in your mother's womb? And he said, yes. Then I asked, what was it like? He said, a lot of water. And it says, was there anything else you felt? He said, it was so boring. I wanted to get out. It was interesting. I mean, I don't know if he made this up or whatnot, but it was interesting. 2 years later, this was last year, he came over to my house and I was just babysitting him and his brother. We did some volcano experiment and then some little toy building. And then I asked him again, Jace, now he's 5 years old, do you remember when you were in your mother's womb? And he said, yes. What do you remember? Water. He described something similar to what he said 2 years prior. But then I asked him, do you remember the time before you were in your mother's womb? And immediately he said, yes. And actually, I asked him that same question 2 years ago. And he said yes at that time too. And then I asked him, what was it like? Who was there? 2 years ago, he shared that it was a lot of women who were taking care of him. Interesting. Last year when I asked him, he didn't specify women, but he said there were a lot of people. And also there were a lot of other babies. And then I asked him, do you know what that place felt like? He said, like Changshamwan. So that was interesting to me. Actually, 2 years ago, he said the exact same thing. He didn't say Changshamwan, he said a really big house with grass and a large room, something like that. This time he said Changshamwan. So I was intrigued. And this is a mystery of life. Many of us forget. Some of us remember. Many of us may never live in this physical world to tell of what's to come. But some of us do. And it may merit each and every one of us to listen to these voices. Because perhaps there's something that we all ought to know. If someone can remember the life before they came here on this earth, then perhaps there is a life thereafter. Father talks about the world of water. When we're in our mother's womb, we don't breathe from our nostrils. We survive enveloped by water. We come into this physical world and we need air. We need air to survive. But what happens when a child in the womb is not prepared for the next life? What happens when their nostrils aren't developed, their lungs are not developed? It becomes much, much harder to survive here. So what is this next world we're preparing for? What is it that we ought to nurture? Described as a world of love, a world of heart, a world where our capacity to love determines our ability to relate. We're all wandering through time. But the reality is, whether we move or not, time is moving. Each second, each day, each year, we get older. We get closer to the end of this season of our life. But it's not the end. It's a beginning of eternity. And when we look at that string of life, in many ways, the time where we live in time is a time when we can change, a time where we can grow. Because the moment time ceases to exist and we can't move with time, we may cease to grow. So it's so important for us to cherish these moments that we have, because these are the times where we can become what we long to be eternally. If we die today, not many of us can say that we are content with where we're at. Did we forgive someone who hurt our hearts? Have we been forgiven by someone who hurt us? Do we have the capacity to love each and every person here in this world? It's something that we have to think about and contend with, because the Bible says that each and every one of us are an existence of God. That each and every one of us is a temple of God. That God resides within us. And Jesus said, whatever you've done to the least of them, you've done to me. So that means if we can't, and God said we are created in His image. So if we can't fully resemble this image of God, that becomes an issue. And this image of God is an image of love. We have to grow in our ability, our capacity to love, because that's what gets us closer to being like God. And we can't do it alone. We have to find our eternal partner to do it with, because each and every one of us represent a certain aspect of God. A masculine, a feminine love, a feminine heart. So, I'd like us to think again, each moment that we're alive, each moment that we live, about the finite nature of the time that we have here. We all have 24 hours in a day, 7 days in a week. What distinguishes us is how we use that time. And just as we make pedantic efforts to make sure we have enough when we're retired, let's invest into our eternal retirement. The eternal life where we come back and come home to our Heavenly Parent and true parents. So let's wander in time meaningfully each day that we live. And let's live each moment with the intention, with the heart that we want for all of eternity. Thank you very much.